Sometimes the forest keeps the secrets of the forgotten until it decides to speak again. The first snow fell like feathers from a torn sky, settling over the trees with a silence that felt almost sacred. Each flake seemed to whisper a name, lost somewhere in the distance. And among those whispers, a small figure walked, a girl no older than 10, her breath forming ghosts in the freezing air. If you are hearing this story, take a moment to breathe. These are the tales of a refugee child, fragments of faith scattered across a broken world. Broken Heart, please, subscribe and tell us where you're listening from. It's our dream to reach 1,000 hearts gathered around these stories of hope. The wind howled through the pine forest, weaving its song between the tall black trunks. The sound wasn't cruel but old, ancient, like the voice of something that had seen too much. The girl pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. It was more a rag than a blanket, frayed and stiff with frost. Her shoes, two mismatched pieces of leather, left shallow prints in the snow that quickly disappeared behind her. The world had forgotten her name. She didn't whisper it anymore. It had been swallowed by the same storm that took her village, her mother, and the smell of warm bread that used to fill their small house. Now, the only sound she carried with her was the faint clinking of the pendant at her neck, a rusted cross, warm only when she prayed. The pines stood like silent witnesses, their branches bending under the weight of snow. Every few steps, the wind would rush through them, and they would murmur, soft, almost kind. The girl had started to believe that the forest spoke to her. Maybe it did. Maybe the world, in its quiet suffering, was still capable of mercy. She stumbled once, her knee hitting a frozen root, and stayed there for a moment. The pain didn't make her cry. Tears no longer came easily. She looked up at the sky. Gray, endless, cold. Somewhere up there, she believed. Her mother watched. "I'm still walking," she whispered through cracked lips. "I didn't stop." A crow landed nearby, black against the white snow. It tilted its head, watching her with a strange, mournful intelligence. She reached out a trembling hand, but the bird hopped away, leaving small marks in the snow, the only sign of movement in that dead world. Her stomach growled softly. For 2 days she'd had nothing but melted snow and the memory of food. Still she walked. There was no map, no direction. Only the faint instinct that somewhere beyond the trees something waited for her. Something she was meant to find. As the light faded, she found a fallen pine, hollow at its base, and crawled beneath it for warmth. The snow hissed softly as it touched the wood above her. The scent of pine sap filled her lungs, sharp, alive, comforting in a strange way. She curled into a ball, whispering the same prayer her mother once taught her. "If I am lost, Lord, find me. If I am forgotten, remember me. If I fall asleep in the cold, wake me in your arms." The forest answered only with the sound of wind. But for the first time in days, she felt safe enough to close her eyes. The ground beneath her was cold, but it no longer felt like an enemy. Somewhere in the distance, wolves began to sing low, hollow notes that rose and fell like a hymn. She didn't fear them. Their voices, strange as they were, felt almost like company. Perhaps they, too, were lonely. Perhaps everyone in this forest, beast and child alike, was searching for the same thing, warmth that could outlast the winter. The stars began to flicker between the branches, faint as dying candles. The girl whispered one last word before sleep took her, a word that had become more prayer than memory. Home. And as the forest sighed around her, a snowflake landed on her cheek. Soft, melting instantly on her warm skin, as if the world itself had answered, "You are not alone." Dawn came slowly, a gray light seeping through the forest like a ghost unsure of its way. The trees stood tall and still, dressed in white, as if carved from silence itself. Beneath them, the girl woke shivering. Her lips were blue. Her small hands, raw from the cold, held the last thing she owned, a tiny cloth doll missing one arm. The snow around her had hardened overnight, glittering like shards of glass. Each breath hurt. Each step sounded like breaking bone. But she kept moving, her eyes half closed, her feet dragging through the frost. She followed no path. There were none. The world after the war had erased all direction. A wind rose, sharp as a blade. It tore through the trees and carried the scent of smoke, distant, faint, For a moment, her heart leaped. Maybe it was a house. Maybe someone still lived beyond the woods. She turned toward it, hope trembling in her chest like a fragile bird. Hours passed. The smoke faded. It had been only a trick of the wind. The realization hit her slowly, like the cold itself, not sudden but deep, crawling into her bones until it became part of her. She sank to her knees. Around her, the forest stretched endlessly, an empire of white and silence. No footsteps but hers. No voices. Not even the echo of her own. She pressed her small hand against her stomach. Hunger was an old ache now, too familiar to notice. Her mother once said that hunger was a teacher, that it reminded us we were alive. But now it felt like a curse, gnawing at the edge of her strength. Somewhere, water whispered, the faint sound of a stream not yet frozen. She followed it, stumbling through the snow, until she found a narrow creek running through the roots of the pines. The water was dark, reflecting the sky like broken glass. She knelt, cupped her hands, and drank. It was so cold it burned. But it was life. A crow cawed above her, loud and sudden. She looked up and saw it perched high, its feathers shining with snowflakes. For a heartbeat, it seemed to watch her, not as prey but as witness. "Are you lost too?" she asked softly. The bird tilted its head, then flew off, black wings cutting through the pale morning. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her memory. "Even when you think you're alone, you are being seen." That thought became her warmth. She began to walk again. Her legs shook. Her breaths grew shorter. The forest shifted as the day faded. Shadows lengthened, colors bled into gray. Still she walked, whispering the same prayer over and over until the words became a heartbeat. "Guide me, Lord. Even if I cannot see, guide me where the light still lives." At sunset, she found a clearing. The snow there was untouched, smooth as glass. In the center stood a single pine, taller than all the rest, its trunk split by lightning long ago. She walked toward it, drawn by something she couldn't name. The air around the tree was strangely warm. She pressed her palm to the bark. Beneath her fingers she felt life, faint but pulsing. The tree was still alive. Against all odds, it had survived the storm. She rested her head against it and closed her eyes. The hum of life inside the wood was quiet, steady, like a heartbeat buried deep in the earth. For the first time in days, she smiled, small, fragile but real. When night came, she lay beside the great tree. Its roots curved like arms around her, keeping the wind away. She whispered, half in dream, "If I can live through one more night, maybe I'll find something beautiful again." Above her, the stars flickered faintly through the snow-laden branches. One star fell, cutting across the sky like a spark of mercy. And the forest, cold, endless, and ancient, listened. The wind carried a different sound that morning. Not the moan of cold or the whisper of snow, but something softer. A melody. At first, the girl thought it was only the wind passing through the branches. But as she listened closer, she heard the rhythm, uneven, gentle, familiar. It was a lullaby. Her mother used to sing it while baking bread. The smell of flour and smoke filled their small kitchen, and she would sit by the window, watching the sun break through the fog that rolled down the valley. Her mother's hands were never still, kneading, shaping, blessing. There was faith even in the way she touched the dough. Now, in the middle of the endless forest, that memory rose from somewhere deep within her, as vivid as firelight behind closed eyes. She stopped walking and stood still. The snow around her shimmered in the pale light. She could almost see it again, the table covered with crumbs, her father laughing softly, her mother's hair loose and gold in the morning sun. The sound of her own breathing broke the illusion. When she opened her eyes, there was only the forest, only white, only silence. She pressed her palms together, holding the memory close before it could fade. "I remember you," she whispered. "I still remember the warmth." She walked again, guided by the echo of her mother's voice. Each step left a print, each print a promise, that she would keep walking, no matter how far the world had fallen. As she moved deeper into the trees, the light changed, the sun low and red, the snow glowing like amber. Her mind drifted between the past and the present, as if the two worlds touched for a moment. She remembered the church at the edge of their village, its bell cracked but still ringing every Sunday. Her mother would take her by the hand, whispering prayers under her breath. Not for what we have, but for what we can still give. The girl had been too young to understand those words. Now, in the cold silence, she finally did. Her feet ached. Her lips were dry and bleeding. Yet her heart, for the first time in days, felt warm. She began to hum the lullaby, softly at first, then louder, letting it fill the forest around her. "Sleep, my child, the storm will pass, the stars will guide you home at last." Her voice cracked halfway through. But she didn't stop. The melody drifted between the pines, and for a moment the forest seemed to listen. Even the wind grew quiet, as if remembering something sacred. When the song ended, the girl sat on a fallen log. She touched the pendant at her neck, the rusted cross, its metal dull but still warm from her hand. She imagined her mother's fingers fastening it there long ago, whispering, "Keep this close, my little light. It will remind you who you are." Now it reminded her that she was still loved, even across the silence, even across death. The forest darkened. Snow began to fall again. Slow, thick, endless. She looked up, watching it spin in the fading light. Each flake seemed alive, glowing faintly before it vanished. A tear slipped down her cheek, warm against her frozen skin. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of memory. Proof that her heart was still capable of feeling. As night fell, she whispered into the wind, "If love is real, let it find me again." Somewhere deep among the trees, a single light flickered, faint, golden, distant. It might have been a reflection, or a miracle. She stood, clutching her pendant, and began to walk toward it. The light she had followed vanished as the night thickened, swallowed by fog and snow. Darkness crept across the forest like a slow tide. The girl walked with arms wrapped around herself, her breath rising in small clouds. Each sound, the crack of ice, the whisper of wind, felt louder than her heartbeat. And then she heard it. A howl, long, hollow, echoing through the trees. It wasn't close, but not far either. The kind of sound that lives between fear and fascination. She froze, her pulse quickening. The forest grew still again, holding its breath. Then another howl came, higher, sharper, joined by others. The chorus of wolves. It rose and fell like a hymn, wild, mournful, ancient. The girl turned slowly, scanning the shadows between the trunks. Nothing moved. Only the snow, falling thick and soft. But she knew they were out there. Watching. Listening. She began to walk faster. Her small boots crunched through the crust of snow. Her breath came in gasps. Every sound she made felt like a signal. A message sent to something waiting in the dark. She whispered her prayer, but the words tangled in her throat. "Please, God, please." The wolves howled again, closer now. Not just one voice, many. She started to run. Branches whipped at her face. Snow flew up around her knees. The forest blurred into streaks of white and black. Behind her, the howls grew louder, rising like thunder. And then silence. She stopped. Listened. Nothing. Only her own heartbeat. The quiet was worse than the sound. A branch cracked behind her. She turned, eyes wide. The shadows seemed to move, alive under the moonlight. Then she saw them. Faint shapes gliding between the trees. Gray fur. Yellow eyes. Silent as smoke. Her breath hitched. She took a step back, then another. The wolves did not charge. They circled, patient, their eyes never leaving her. The largest one, its fur scarred and silvered with age, watched her from the edge of the clearing. Its gaze wasn't hungry. It was curious, almost human. She clutched her pendant and whispered, "I am not your enemy." Her voice trembled, but she stood still. The wolf tilted its head. Snow gathered on its muzzle, glinting faintly. For a moment, the world felt suspended, the girl and the beast, both exiles of the same silence. The wolf blinked once, slowly. Then it turned away, padding back into the darkness. The others followed, shadows melting into deeper shadow. Only their footprints remained. The girl fell to her knees, trembling. Her breath came in short sobs, though she didn't cry. She pressed her forehead against the snow and whispered, "Thank you, thank you," over and over until the words lost their shape. When she finally looked up, she saw it, faint but real, the same golden light she had seen before, glowing through the trees. Closer this time. Warmer. She stood, weak but determined, and began to follow it again. The forest, now silent, seemed to open before her. Each step she took echoed softly, as if the ground itself was guiding her. And high above, on a ridge far from sight, the silver wolf stood watching, unmoving, eyes shining in the moonlight. The light she had been following grew stronger as the night deepened, trembling softly between the trees like a candle held by invisible hands. Each time she thought it would vanish, it flickered again, patient, waiting. The girl moved closer, breath shallow, snow clinging to her lashes. Her body ached from the cold, but something inside her, something ancient and small, kept her walking. When she finally reached the clearing, she saw it. A cabin. It stood half buried in snow, its wooden walls warped with age, its roof bent under years of winter. The windows were dark, but faint trails of smoke still curled from the chimney, thin, almost invisible against the sky. She froze, afraid to believe it was real. She had seen too many mirages. Smoke that turned to fog, shapes that vanished when touched. But the smell of burning would drifted faintly through the air, and that smell was real. It smelled like life. Slowly, she climbed the small hill that led to the door. The steps were covered in ice. A small cross was carved into the frame, worn smooth by time, almost hidden beneath the frost. Her fingers brushed against it. Warm. She pushed the door. It creaked open. Inside, the air was cold but still held the ghost of warmth. The cabin was small. One room, maybe two. A broken chair. A table. A shelf with a few jars covered in dust. And on the far wall, a wood stove, long extinguished but smelling faintly of ash and smoke. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The silence shifted. Heavy. Breathing. Her eyes adjusted to the dark, and slowly she began to see. There were things scattered across the floor. Old shoes, torn pages, bits of wood. A blanket lay crumpled near the hearth. She knelt beside it and touched it gently. It was still warm. Someone had been here. Her heart began to race. She turned, scanning every shadow, every corner. "Hello," she whispered. No answer. Only the sound of the wind pushing softly against the windows. She took a slow step toward the table. Something glinted there, a small metallic shape half hidden under dust. She brushed the surface clean. It was a candle holder. And in it, a candle, burned halfway down, its wax melted into small rivers along the wood. Without knowing why, she picked it up. The wick was black, cold, but whole. She held it close to her lips and whispered the prayer her mother taught her. Where light once lived, let it live again. Then she placed it back down and searched the shelves. After a moment, she found an old box of matches. Damp, but not ruined. Her hands shook as she struck one. The first two broke. The third caught fire. The flame was small, trembling, but it was enough. She lit the candle. The light filled the room like breath returning to lungs. Shadows fled to the corners, and the wooden walls glowed softly in gold. The cabin, which had felt empty, now felt almost alive. She turned slowly, and that's when she saw it. On the table beside the candle lay a small book, its cover worn, its pages yellowed. A Bible. It was open to a page where the ink had faded from time, but a single verse was still clear. "I will not leave you as orphans, I will come to you." The girl's hand covered her mouth. Her breath caught. For a moment, she forgot the hunger, the fear, the loneliness. The words were like a heartbeat, steady, ancient, alive. She traced them with her fingertip, whispering them under her breath. She didn't understand why, but she felt that someone had left this for her. Not by accident, but by design. Tears gathered in her eyes. "You found me," she whispered. She sat on the floor beside the flickering candle, wrapped in the faint glow of warmth and faith. Outside, the wind still roared, but inside there was peace. And as she began to drift into sleep, she thought she heard footsteps outside. Slow, careful, human. But she was too tired to open her eyes. The candle burned low. The snow fell quietly. And in the distance, the wolves sang once more. Not in hunger this time, but in something that almost sounded like praise. Morning crept slowly through the cracks of the cabin walls. The pale light touched her face, waking her from a dream she couldn't remember. The candle had burned down to its base during the night, leaving a small pool of wax that glimmered like a frozen tear. She sat up, her breath misting in the cold air. For a moment she couldn't tell if what had happened was real. The candle, the Bible, the warmth she had felt before falling asleep. Everything seemed too gentle for this world. Her hands still rested on the open pages. The words were faint but clear. "I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you." She whispered it again and again, as though saying it aloud might make it truer. The forest outside was silent. Unnervingly so. The snow that had fallen overnight pressed against the window panes like pale ghosts. But within the walls of that small cabin, she felt something new. Not safety exactly, but presence. She rose slowly and began to explore. The floorboards groaned under her weight. In one corner stood a wooden chest, its lid half broken. Inside were a few folded clothes, a tin cup, and a woolen scarf. She lifted it to her nose. It smelled faintly of smoke and pine, and of someone who had once been alive. She wrapped it around her neck. The warmth that spread through her wasn't just from the fabric. It was something deeper, older, like the memory of being held. Beside the stove, she found a few pieces of dry wood stacked neatly. She remembered her father's hands building fires in winter, the sound of crackling flames filling their small home. She stacked the wood carefully, struck another match from the damp box, and prayed it would light. It did. The flames rose, hesitant at first, then steady, licking the walls with amber light. The cabin came alive again. The shadows dancing, the air filling with the scent of smoke and warmth. She crouched near the fire, holding her hands out toward it, and whispered, "Thank you." Then suddenly she heard a sound, faint but clear. A knock. Once. Then again. Her heart leapt. She turned toward the door, frozen in place. The sound wasn't the creak of wood or the wind's trickery. It was deliberate. Human. She hesitated, then stepped closer. Who's there? No answer. Only the sound of the wind sighing through the trees. Her breath caught in her throat. She waited. The silence stretched until she almost believed she had imagined it. But then, through the narrow window, she saw movement, a shadow passing slowly across the snow. Her heart pounded. She glanced back at the fire, its warmth now a small shield of courage. "If this story touches your heart," she whispered as though speaking to the unseen world beyond, "don't forget to subscribe." It was a habit of prayer now, a way to remind the listener, whoever they were, that hope was still alive. She reached for the candle on the table, still warm at its base, and held it in her hand as if it were a talisman. The flame flickered softly, casting golden circles on the wooden walls. Then she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Under the table, half hidden by dust and shadow, was a small wooden box, carved with delicate symbols, tiny stars and crosses etched into its surface. She knelt, heart beating faster, and pulled it out. The latch was rusted but gave way with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in cloth, lay a small metal key, old, darkened by time, and beneath it a folded piece of paper. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was rough but clear. "To whoever finds this place, I built this fire for the one who would come after me. Keep the flame alive. There is another door beneath the floor." Her breath caught. She looked down. The floorboards near the stove were uneven. One plank had a small crack running through it, just wide enough to slip a finger inside. She knelt and pulled. The board lifted with a slow groan. Beneath it was a small hollow, dark, filled with dust. And inside it, wrapped in old linen, was another book, smaller than the Bible, bound in leather. She unwrapped it slowly. The leather was cracked, the pages fragile. On the first page, written in trembling ink, were 4 words, "This was my daughter." She felt her heart break open. Whoever had lived here before, They had lost someone too. And in their grief, they had left behind this place, this light, this message. Tears blurred her vision as she turned the page. The handwriting grew weaker with each line. If she ever finds her way here, tell her I forgave the world before I left it. Tell her she was loved. The girl pressed the small book to her chest, unable to breathe. The words felt meant for her, though she knew they couldn't be. Yet somehow they were. Outside, the wind had stopped. Snow fell softly, peacefully. The fire crackled, the candle flickered, and the cabin, once a place of emptiness, glowed as though the sun itself had returned to the forest. She whispered, her voice trembling between tears and gratitude. "You didn't abandon me. You led me here." The fire had dimmed to embers when she woke. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The walls, the faint smell of smoke, the Bible on the table, all seemed half unreal, like a dream fading with the morning light. Then she heard it again. The sound that had stirred her sleep. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Careful. Crunching in the snow outside. She sat up, her breath quick and shallow. The air inside the cabin had turned colder overnight. Frost rimed the windows, painting delicate white veins across the glass. Through one of them, she saw a shadow moving, tall, bent slightly, carrying something over one shoulder. She froze. Every muscle in her body tensed. The steps came closer, then stopped. The handle of the door moved, just slightly, a test. The hinges groaned. And then the door opened. A man stood in the threshold. His hair was white as the snow outside, his beard thick, unkempt. His coat was torn, patched with different kinds of cloth, and his boots were heavy, worn smooth with years of walking. In his arms, he carried a bundle of wood. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind slipped between them, whispering through the open doorway. The girl's lips parted, but no sound came. She clutched the small leather book to her chest, trembling. The man blinked, his eyes sharp but kind, the color of old steel. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, shaped by years of silence. "I thought this place was empty." The girl swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "It was. Until last night." He set down the bundle of wood slowly, as though afraid any sudden movement might frighten her. "How long have you been out there?" "I don't know," she said. "Since the snow began." He nodded, once solemnly, as if he understood something words could never carry. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The air changed, warmer somehow. He glanced at the fire, now a faint glow. "You found the matches," he said quietly. "And the candle." She nodded. "Were they yours?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No. They were left for me. Same as for you, I think." He knelt by the hearth, feeding the dying flame with new wood. The fire caught, spreading light across his weathered face. He didn't look at her for a long time. When he finally did, his eyes were wet. "You shouldn't have survived the night." She didn't answer. Instead, she held out the small book, the one she had found beneath the floor. "Was this yours?" He looked at it, and for the first time his hand shook. He took the book gently as though it were something holy. His fingers traced the cracked leather, the familiar shape of it. He opened it, saw the words inside, and closed his eyes. "Yes," he whispered. It was hers. The silence between them deepened. The girl didn't move. She didn't know what to say. He sat down heavily on the floor beside the fire. "My daughter," he said after a while. "She didn't make it through the winter. I buried her beneath the tree outside. I thought," his voice broke, "I thought maybe God had buried me too." The girl stared at him, her throat tight. "I found your message," she said softly. "In the box." He nodded. His eyes shone in the firelight. "Then you know," he said. "I left this place so the next lost soul who came here would find light. I never thought it would be a child. I found it," she said. "And it found me." For a long time, they sat together in silence, listening to the fire crackle. Outside, the wind softened to a murmur. The world no longer felt cruel, only tired. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of bread, hard but clean. He broke it in half and offered her the larger piece. She hesitated, then took it. The first bite was dry, but it was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. They ate in silence. And in that silence, something passed between them. Not words, not names, but understanding. When they were done, he looked at her and said quietly, "You can stay. For as long as the snow lasts." She nodded, unable to speak. The firelight flickered between them, casting their shadows against the walls. An old man and a child, both broken, both still alive. Outside, dawn touched the forest, faint gold threading through the pines. And for the first time since she could remember, the girl felt what she had been searching for all along. Not safety, not warmth, but belonging. The days that followed passed like slow-moving clouds. Time no longer marched, it breathed. The man and the child lived together in quiet rhythm. Their words few, but their gestures gentle. The fire became their companion, burning day and night, its soft glow a pulse of life in the middle of the frozen world. Each morning, the man went outside to gather wood. His footprints were the only marks in the snow, strong, steady, deliberate. When he returned, his beard glistened with frost, and the smell of pine filled the cabin. He always brought something small for her: a pine cone, a handful of berries, a feather fallen from a bird. The girl would smile, shy, fleeting smiles, and place the gifts on the windowsill beside the candle. She had made it her little altar, where she whispered prayers of thanks each evening. Inside, the silence was never empty. It had a texture, soft, alive. The sound of the fire cracking, the creak of old wood shifting in the wind, the quiet clink of the man's tin cup as he poured water for them both. Sometimes he would hum a low, broken tune that seemed to belong to no song at all. It was the sound of someone who had forgotten the words but remembered the feeling. She would listen in stillness, her eyes reflecting the flames. One night, when the wind howled fiercely outside, she whispered, "My mother used to sing too." He looked at her, eyes shining. What did she sing? The girl hesitated, then began softly, "Sleep, my child, the storm will pass, the stars will guide you home at last." Her voice was thin at first, trembling. But as the melody rose, the room seemed to warm. The old man bowed his head, tears gathering in his beard. When the song ended, neither spoke. They didn't need to. That night she dreamed of her village again. The bell tower rising through the mist, her mother kneeling by the fire, the sound of laughter echoing from somewhere beyond time. But when she woke, she didn't cry. The dream no longer hurt. It was a gift, a visit from something kind. Days turned into weeks. The storm outside raged, but inside there was peace. Together they shared what little food they had: bread that crumbled like dust, snow melted for water, and once, a rabbit the man caught with trembling hands. They said no blessing aloud, but each bite felt sacred. Every crumb, every swallow, a reminder that life, even in its smallest measure, was grace. The man began to tell her pieces of his story, in fragments. He spoke of the war, the fire, the night he lost his daughter. He spoke without bitterness, only fatigue. "I stayed alive," he said once, staring at the flames, "because I didn't know how to die properly." The girl didn't understand the words, but she understood the pain behind them. She reached out, took his rough, scarred hand in her small fingers, and said, "Then maybe you stayed alive to help me." He looked at her for a long time. Then, slowly, he smiled. "Maybe I did." From that moment on, the silence between them became something sacred. Not the silence of emptiness, but of peace. Sometimes they would sit for hours by the fire, saying nothing. Sometimes they would listen to the wind and pretend it was the voice of God, telling stories too holy to be spoken aloud. The forest, once a place of fear, now seemed to protect them. Birds began to return, their songs faint but real. The wolves no longer howled at night. They lingered farther away, as if keeping watch. One evening, as the sun bled gold over the snow, the man said quietly, "When the thaw comes, the river will open again. You could follow it south. Find people." She looked up from the small Bible she had been reading by the candlelight. "I will," she said softly. "But not alone." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Her words had already filled the cabin with something brighter than the fire. Hope. Outside, the last light of day stretched long and thin across the frozen trees, and inside 2 souls, one old and one young, shared the simplest communion of all, bread and silence. The first sign of spring came not with flowers, but with sound. One morning, as the girl opened her eyes, she heard it, water. Faint, delicate, the soft trickle of a thawing stream beyond the cabin walls. She sat up, holding her breath. The sound was strange after months of silence. It was like hearing the earth breathe again. The old man was already awake, sitting by the fire, sharpening a piece of wood into the shape of a small spoon. He smiled faintly when he saw her listening. "The ice is breaking," he said. "The world is waking up." The girl wrapped herself in the wool scarf and stepped outside. The air was still cold but softer, no longer cruel. Snow dripped from the branches in silver threads. The pines smelled alive again, their sap warming in the sunlight. The sky, for the first time in many weeks, was blue. A robin landed nearby, pecking at the thawing ground. She watched it, her breath trembling with joy. It wasn't just a bird, it was a promise. When she looked back at the cabin, smoke rose from the chimney in gentle curls, like a signal of life. For the first time, she saw how beautiful the little home was. Crooked and patched, yet standing firm, its wood golden in the morning light. Inside, the man had boiled water and placed 2 cups on the table. He had found dried herbs somewhere in the forest weeks ago. Bitter, but fragrant. Together they drank in silence, the steam warming their faces. Afterward, he handed her a small piece of wood, carved into the rough shape of a bird. "For your window," he said simply. She turned it over in her hands, smiling. "It's beautiful." "It's not finished," he said, chuckling softly. "Like the rest of us." She laughed, a sound that startled even her. It was light, fragile like glass but real. The old man laughed too, though his laughter cracked from disuse. For a moment, the cabin echoed with the sound of life returning, not just to the forest but to them. That afternoon they went outside together. The snow had thinned enough for their boots to sink into soft mud. The man showed her how to check the traps, how to gather dry moss for the fire, how to tell which pine branches burned longest. The girl listened carefully, memorizing every movement. She wanted to remember it all, the rhythm of this new life. When they returned to the cabin, she placed the wooden bird on the windowsill beside the candle. The light of sunset fell across both, the carved bird and the little flame, and for the first time, she thought that maybe she understood what home meant. That night, as the fire dimmed and the forest whispered beyond the walls, she looked at the man and said, "When the snow melts, will you come with me?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes followed the flames, his face carved by both sorrow and peace. Finally, he said, "I buried everything I loved out there. I thought I was meant to stay, but maybe God was waiting for someone to show me the way back." She smiled. "Then we'll go together." He nodded slowly. The candle flickered, and for a moment it seemed to burn brighter, its small flame reflected in both their eyes. Outside, the forest glowed with the faintest hue of green beneath the snow, the first color of the new world. The girl pressed her hands together and whispered a small prayer, her voice steady and full of light. "Thank you for the winter because it taught me how to love the morning." And somewhere deep among the pines, a bird began to sing, clear, unwavering, triumphant. The last of the snow melted in silence. For days, the sound of dripping water had filled the forest, a slow rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. The pines shimmered with dew. The frozen river had broken open, its surface glinting like glass under the first true sun of spring. Inside the cabin, the air was different now, lighter, filled with the scent of wet wood and thawing earth. The girl stood by the window, her small hand resting on the frame. The wooden bird she had placed there watched the world outside, sunlight tracing its wings. Behind her, the old man packed what little they owned, a few loaves of bread wrapped in cloth, the Bible, and the small book of his daughter's words. He moved slowly, reverently, as though each item carried more memory than weight. When he was done, he looked around the cabin one last time. "This place kept us alive," he said softly. But it was never meant to keep us forever. The girl nodded. She understood. The forest had been her cradle of suffering, and her sanctuary of rebirth. They stepped outside together. The air smelled of pine and soil and sunlight. The forest, once gray and lifeless, now shimmered with color. Tiny buds sprouting from branches, moss glowing green beneath their feet. Birds sang from every direction, their songs weaving like prayers. The girl turned toward the great tree at the center of the clearing, the one struck by lightning long ago, the one that had sheltered her on that terrible night. She placed her hand against its bark. It was warm. "Thank you," she whispered. The man watched her in silence, his eyes glistening. They began their walk along the thawing river. Each step left prints that filled quickly with water. The world around them moved again, alive, forgiving. For a long time they didn't speak. Words seemed too small for the moment. But as they walked, the man said quietly, "You remind me of her." The girl looked up. "Your daughter." He nodded. "She was small like you. Brave. She believed in things she couldn't see." The girl smiled gently. "Then maybe she's the one who brought me here." He didn't answer, but the way he looked at the sky said he believed it too. They walked until the sun reached its highest point, painting the world in gold. The forest thinned, opening into a wide meadow. Wildflowers had begun to bloom between patches of snow, their colors defiant against the pale earth. They stopped there, resting. The man knelt, striking a spark with a piece of flint. The small flame caught in the dry grass, then settled into a calm fire between them. He handed her the matches, the same ones she had used to light the candle the night she found the cabin. "These belong to you now," he said, "to light the way forward." She took them carefully, holding them as if they were made of gold. The fire crackled softly. Smoke rose into the clear sky. She watched the flame dance, reflected in her eyes. "It's strange," she said. "I used to think fire only burned. But now I know it also remembers." The man smiled, the lines on his face softening. "It remembers because we do." They sat there until the fire became embers, glowing faintly in the afternoon light. The forest hummed with life around them. Insects, birds, the murmur of the river. When they finally stood, the girl turned to look back one last time. The path behind them was fading into mist, the cabin hidden among the trees. She whispered, not to the man, but to the wind, "I was not abandoned. I was led." And in that moment she felt something. Not warmth exactly, but a light inside her, quiet and steady, like a flame that would never go out. As they walked toward the horizon, the man said, "The world is still broken, you know." She smiled. "Then we'll mend it. One light at a time." The wind carried their voices through the valley, blending with the sound of the river, with the song of the birds, with the breath of a world learning to live again. When the sun finally dipped behind the mountains, the sky burned with soft fire, gold, pink, and fading blue. And in that light, the two of them, an old man and a refugee child, kept walking. Together. Closing reflection, for the listener sometimes, it is not the world that saves us. It is a single act of kindness, a spark of mercy, that becomes our fire within. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share where you're listening from. It's our dream to reach 1,000 hearts gathered around these tales of faith, hope, and rebirth. Red Heart.